Thank you so much, Ari. So I'm Rabbi Marc Margolius. I'm a senior program director with the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, co-founded, as we learned in the film, by Rachel. I'm here with Paula Weiman-Kelman, the filmmaker, and Kari Lazar White, longtime friend and founder and director of Brotherhood Sister Sol, an amazing social service agency, social justice organization in Harlem. And we're here to have a conversation and hopefully to engage all of you in that conversation. You know, I almost feel like I just want to sit here for a little bit. Truthfully, it's a beautiful, beautiful film, Paula. And it actually feels like, sounds cliched for me to be sitting here saying this. It felt like a very spiritual experience to sit with. And I've seen the film 3 times now. And I've learned something new each time. So I want to begin just by inviting you to introduce yourselves and say something about your relationship with Rachel. And maybe just for beginners, just to get the ball moving, how her spirit lives on in you in your life.
So I just want to start by thanking you all for being here, and thanking Mark and Kari for being up here with me, and Ari, thank you, Ari, for the Museum of Jewish Heritage showing this movie, and this is the first event we've had since COVID, and I'm just looking around and I just want to cry seeing real people in a room watching a real movie. And the film premiered in March 2020, and we had 300 people, standing room only, and the next week everything closed. So seeing it again, also seeing it, I kept wanting just feeling Rachel so much in the film, and I've seen the film hundreds of times, and for me, every time I see it with a different audience, brings something different to it. I met Rachel because she was friendly with my late father-in-law, Rabbi Wolf Kelman, and Paul and Rachel became very close to Wolf and Jackie when Levi and I moved to Israel, and they took our place at the Friday night table. And the first conversation I remember having with Rachel privately after Paul died was when we went whitewater rafting in Aspen at a Wexner retreat. But it was just, she was just so, it was so exciting. That was like the beginning. I thought that's what Rachel was like. And then, I'll talk a little bit more and then I'll, sure, but the first time I filmed Rachel was when we went on an American Jewish World Service trip to Thailand and Cambodia. And you see some scenes from that in here when she was with Dhammananda, the first female monk ordained in Thailand. And I really wanted to make a movie about Rachel and Dhammananda, and I wanted to make a movie about Rachel doing retreats in Alaska, and I wanted to make a movie about Rachel in Costa Rica, and I wanted to make a movie about Rachel at Brotherhood and Sister Sol. And we were going to do that movie, and we were all set to do that movie, and we were all excited. And then I got the phone call that she was diagnosed with glioblastoma, and the movie changed. But I do want to say that a question I'm often asked is there anything that you left out of the movie that you wish could have been in it? And I always answer her relationship to Brotherhood Sister Sol. So this is a tikkun that now you can talk about Rachel's relationship with you.
You know, as you sit and watch a film like that about Rachel, you know, I think it just affirms her deep, deep spirituality. I knew Rachel my entire life. She was one of my mother's best friends, Jane Lazar's best friends. And I think the thing about Rachel is that she always had a presence to her. She always had a very accessible spirituality. There are people who have a spirituality or a religiosity that keeps them afar. Rachel's was just a presence. She was somebody who always understood, and I think she talked about it in the film, the connecting of the global to the personal. When she says throughout the film that she wants her spirit to live on, it lives on in all of us. It lives on in her children, certainly, Matt and Lisa, who I grew up with, and her grandchildren. Everything that Rachel dedicated herself to, she was completely committed to and wondrous about, whether it was religion. And as a very small child, when she began this journey, I wrote in a card to her that I hoped she had a good time being Jewish, and I think she did. And whether she kayaked and was on a canoe, whether she was being mindful and spiritual, whether she was being a grandparent or a mother, she was somebody who was committed to issues of justice and their intersection with spirituality. And so I think that history, when I think about her going to Mississippi at a time when so few people were brave enough to go to Mississippi, to register people to vote, to work in one of the darkest, most dangerous parts of the South during the Civil Rights Movement, to me that's a spiritual decision. When she decides to revive Anshe Hesed and to build a community in a space where folks thought that that community was dying, that's a spiritual decision. When she sat and held Paul's hand, who was such a big personality and filled the room. Paul Cowan was a mighty figure. Everyone knew Paul when he walked in the room, and to be comfortable in his space, at times standing behind him, at times next to him, and then at times in front of him, is a spiritual decision. And so when she went on this journey to become a rabbi and to become a spiritual leader, we all knew how successful she would be in it. And Matt used to say that, walking down the street of the Upper West Side with Rachel was, like walking down the street with, the Dalai Lama or a beloved president. Everyone knew her. Everybody felt that they were connected to her. And so when she says at the end that she hopes her spirit lives on, that's a fait accompli, because so many people feel that Rachel is a part of them and in them. And I know certainly my family does, and I do. And, she's just a beloved figure, and she continues to be.
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you. Maybe we just want to continue in that thread, because what struck me this time about the film, and just to give you a heads up, Paula, my follow-up question for you actually has to do with what is this film about in terms of Rachel's life? When the first time I saw it, I felt like, well, is this a film about Rachel's illness and how she dealt with that, and ultimately her death? Is it a film about her life? Like you said, it was originally intended to be a film about her life. And as I watched it now, I think for the third time, that question has kind of evaporated for me. That there are certain things about it, common denominators, that run throughout her whole life. Before her conversion, before, in each kind of iteration, in each stage of her life, that I see like a quality that's there that I would also describe as a spiritual quality that she began to have names for and frames for as she moved through all these different stages of her life. But particularly this intersection of spirituality and social justice. At the beginning, just to take prerogative here, because I also was a longtime friend of Rachel's, Paul's book, which was referenced, had the blessing to meet Paul, but his book changed my life. Became a rabbi in part, having read that book, An Orphan in History. That at the beginning of the movie, she says, I couldn't do this if I hadn't had a practice for a long time. She doesn't use the word practice that often in the film, but we use the word practice a lot. And what that means to me is practicing the ability to stay as much as possible in the present with curiosity, with openness, and to see what's really true right now. And that struck me as the through line for the film. That's a quality that she had, Quaker girls' camp, and before that stayed the same, was constant, and that her social justice commitments grew out of that capacity to see what's really going on And so I know, in terms of your work and your connection, I would love to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more about the intersection of her involvement, your BroSis and her involvement with it, and her vision for, and your vision for integrating spirituality and social justice in the work that's happening there.
Sure. I'll talk about Rachel's deep love for Brotherhood Sister Sol. She was a founding board member in 1995, and the Brotherhood Sister Sol is a comprehensive youth development social justice organization that's working in the intersection of educating, organizing, and training. And she had a deep love for our work. But again, I think to your point, that came from her family and from her training. Her sister Connie also has a real presence to her, who I've known also my whole life. And I would also say spirituality. I don't know if Connie would necessarily agree with that, but again, a very kind of stable, grounded quality to her. They were both very involved in the left, very involved in deep progressive movements, radical movements that articulated a different vision for change. You saw Kathy Boudin in the video, another dear friend of Rachel's and of my mother's, somebody who was committed to change in many different ways, pre her incarceration, during her incarceration, and post. So Rachel surrounded herself with, from a family level and a friend level, people who were actually committed to social justice and did the work. So when she joined our board of directors at our founding in 1995, it felt completely natural to have Rachel on our board because she brought a commitment to civil rights and to justice and to equity and equality, and a really lived commitment. But she also brought a sense of calmness, which I think is important at times in that work. And so when she got into her mindfulness practice, she would train our staff on mindfulness practices. She would talk to our staff about the importance for organizers and activists to have mindfulness practices in their life. And so when we decided 7 or 8 years ago to take the big step to build a new building in Harlem, a 20,000 square foot beacon for children, Rachel wanted to endow the room for mindfulness and meditation. She wanted to endow it in the name of Martin Luther King as a space where young people could learn about mindfulness and meditation, and she raised the funds to do it, and she was a dynamo because when Rachel committed to something, she was all in. She held a birthday party at our former brownstone to raise funds for it. But what it was that she understood that our lives and humanity, as she said in the film, are interconnected. And that if you really believe in justice and equity and equality, it's justice and equity and equality for everybody. It's how she lived her life in all of these ways. And so the room she wanted named for Martin Luther King, and as Rachel, could be, she said, I don't want my name attached to it. But I talked with Lisa, her daughter, and we negotiated the fact that I will definitely be adding Rachel's name to it because it's just too important for her not to be represented in our space. And so it'll be the Martin Luther King Room for Mindfulness, endowed by Rabbi Rachel Cowan. And it's a space that should always carry her name because she had such a profound presence and effect on our work.
Can you just say a few words? I feel like we could talk a long time about this. What's your vision for what that means for the youth that you work with at Brotherhood Sister Sol in terms of mindfulness, meditation? How do you see that playing into the work you do?
Well, obviously, all people need mindfulness practices. We need to be connected to mind, to body, and to spiritual development. And these were aspects that I talked with Rachel a lot about. We all need that. But there's a certain type of trauma and realities that one has to face when you live in economic poverty. And a third of all New Yorkers live in economic poverty, nearly 3 million people in this city. And it means that you are making very difficult decisions on the day-to-day about health care or food, about transportation or about education. And so Rachel identified that first we have to do something about that injustice, and we have to do work about that injustice, and we have to change our world, but we also have to help people to learn skills to cope with the reality that they face, not just so that they can endure it, but that hopefully that folks, as she said in the film, can rise up and change those conditions and can demand a change. And so I think the intersection of mindfulness and stabilizing practices as activists and as organizers is key. And at Brotherhood Sister Sol, we're training young people to be organizers and activists, and so we feel that they need both that self-reflection and then that outward organizing.
It's beautiful, and may it come to pass soon. So back to you, Paula.
One
Go ahead.
time, the working title of the film was "My Life is My Practice." She had gone to a doctor who said, I hear you're a meditation teacher, and what's your practice? And she just said, "My life is my practice."
You know what else struck me watching it from the get-go in terms of the practice was, and I was so glad that this is in there, that in the seemingly insignificant interactions that Rachel had, with people in the film, and I'm sure you could have found countless others, when she walks into the JCC and she greets the security guard and she says, having a bit of a challenge, but and there was at least one other, just where she noticed and was present for and connected to every person. That's another aspect of the practice, that nothing and no one was insignificant. And I want to just share that. When I remember one of the, she led many meditations, but one of the most beautiful ones I remember that I learned from was practicing compassion in a New York City subway car, a crowded car, which these days, that's a real practice, a crowded subway car, where she would describe sitting in the subway car, irritated and annoyed and whatever, thinking about the day and saying, right now I could be sitting here and connecting with everybody in this car and offering some compassion to them, which is central to the practice, right? Was to remember to be present. There are other human beings here who are deserving and in need of compassion, and to remember that. And that was something that she really exemplified all the way through to the end.
I really remember feeling when I talked to Rachel that I was the most important person in the world. And it was very uplifting. And then I noticed that everyone she spoke to felt the same way. But it didn't lessen how I felt.
Yeah. What do you, I want to see if we can maybe put her life a little bit in her life stretched through the 50s and the 60s, and she had a profound impact on American Jewish life for sure. And we're here in the Museum of Jewish Heritage. But how would you position her, and probably we should bring Paul into it too, in terms of where they fit into the arc of American history or New York City history? Kari, maybe you could speak to that a little bit, especially as someone who grew up, part of that world.
I think that Rachel and Paul were people who, at a time when many people did not want to confront the horrors that existed in this country, when many people of financial background that was wealthy, when people who were empowered.
Right, and they were people of privilege.
That's what I'm saying.
Great privilege.
Rachel would talk about the fact that her family had essentially been here since the time of the Mayflower, and Paul came from a very, high-profile family, of course, that, gave them both access to power and access to resources. And the vast majority of people in those conditions did not travel to Mississippi to register people to vote, did not join the Peace Corps, did not get involved in, efforts to transform this country in terms of inequity, in terms of the war in Vietnam, etc. There are people who lived their mission. They lived their commitment to justice. And, this was a time in New York in the 70s and in the 80s when, whether it was the president saying the city should drop dead due to economic realities, or when people were framing the difficulties in the city around the onslaught of violence and framing it about poverty, as opposed to what is our responsibility to other human beings, what is our responsibility to build a safety net, what is our responsibility to educate all people. They were committed to these ideals. That's how they raised Matt and Lisa. It's the people they surrounded themselves with. And so what I think was special about both of them, obviously we're talking about Rachel this evening, but Paul as well, is that they were two people who really believed that you had to live your philosophy, that it wasn't enough to just say you were a good person or to articulate a different vision, but what is your role, your active role in trying to create a better world? And in many ways, yes, that was based in their Jewish faith and in Paul and being born a Jew, but for them, it wasn't only about that. It was also about an identity that wasn't about being Jewish, but being a world citizen in the way that Rachel would travel the world and see connections to other people. It was about seeing your role, yes, a tiny, tiny grain of sand, as Rachel talked about, but the power of a tiny grain of sand as well. You know?
And the connections, and the amazing, I mean, you know, sometimes it felt like the whole world knew Rachel Cowan, but obviously that's not the case. But she wove a web of connection that, you know, that honored diversity and particularism, and at the same time recognized universality and moved easily, you know, through all those different worlds in, I think, a really remarkable way.
She didn't despair. She didn't despair. She did get a brain tumor 3 months after Trump was elected. And I always, you know, teased her that it was that she just couldn't bear. But she, even with her glioblastoma, she made a video to work against, you know, changing Obamacare. You know, even with something growing in her brain, she still could be active and be an activist.
Yeah. One other thing I just want to note before we move to some questions from the audience is that one of the things that also struck me upon rewatching the film was about Rachel's acknowledgement of fear and terror in dealing with a terminal illness, right? That the practice did not involve, you know, blind faith. Although at some point she said, "I have faith." But I didn't take that to mean I have faith that everything's going to work out. That faith for her really had to do with just being able to be present moment by moment and to name the fear and to recognize I move back and forth between fear and being able to be in the present and saying, well, dying doesn't feel like what I'm doing right now because I'm alive and I have today. So I'm not dying right now. I'm alive. I'm fully alive right now. And as she quoted the line from the Torah, to choose life. It's very, very moving and an essential part of the practice. And all of these things, I think, wove together as a common denominator: her curiosity, openness, which led to awareness and commitment to compassion, healing, justice, honoring people, being present for people, all the things we've named. So here's a great question from someone. Rachel impacted New York in so many ways. How do you think New York impacted or shaped her? Khary, maybe you want to take that one.
I think that, Rachel found in New York maybe a city that matched her internal speed. I mean, I think anyone who knew Rachel before she became ill, she did not stop from early in the morning till late in the evening. She was always going to a meeting, always going to a synagogue, always meeting with a, community board, always spending time with a loved one. She always had time for a meal, for a contact, for a time to be in service to somebody else. And as the city that never sleeps, I feel like, this relative country bumpkin found a city that, matched her speed and her energy. I also think the worldliness of New York was something that was an anchor for her. As somebody who is constantly curious about the world and all aspects of the world, the beauty of New York, if you choose to live in New York in this way, because not everybody does, is the diversity of New York and the ability to find so many different communities and so many different opportunities to learn and to grow intellectually and spiritually. And I think she found that. I think she found the diversity of the city to be sustenance for her and sustenance for her soul.
Yeah, I think that hits the nail on the head. And then on top of that is, which we haven't mentioned yet, is her, but comes through in the film too, is her love of nature.
Yes.
The filming and the beautiful filming that you did, Paula, of the park and the trees. And living, right next to Riverside Park, and Rachel as a birder,
Yeah.
and as a keen observer of birds in
Did you
Central
notice
Park.
all the birds in the film? There were, because I couldn't show the birds. The soundtrack weaves in, especially the scarlet tanager, because she believed she was going to be reincarnated as scarlet tanager.
The archival materials, here's another question, the videos, which were really kind of remarkable, and their treatment are beautiful. Can you just say a little bit more about that, Paula? Because I almost felt like I'd just like to watch quite a bit of the home
There
movies.
was such a richness of material. There's so many things that I couldn't include. It was sort of like a game of Russian roulette. I would Google Rachel, and something new would come up. There'd be an interview with Paul, or Rachel was on television on 9/12 with an imam and a priest talking about the towers. It's just chilling to watch. I found Rachel's name wasn't mentioned, but there's a film of volunteers in Mississippi watching television about Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney, and you see Rachel put her hand to her face, and she's just she just exists in film, and it's so time travel, Star Trek to me, to be able to see her so young and so old, and to travel back and forth. It's a fortunate filmmaker that has a character like Rachel.
Yeah. I think I've seen that one online, so people maybe can find that one. It is really, it's so powerful. There was a question, Paula, for you about the emotional experience of making this film, as a dear friend and documenting this process. What was it like for you to be in sort of that dual role of beloved friend and documentarian for this?
I could never have made this film if Rachel didn't want it to be made. I would always ask her and be clear, but for her it was like it enabled her not to have to write her memoirs, because here it was, I was helping her tell her story. Whenever there was a choice between being a friend or being a filmmaker, I chose friend, I was acutely aware of intruding on the life of her family, and I tried to do it as minimally as possible, but I really felt that the camera was a third eye in the future that was ensuring that Rachel would be remembered. And when I watch it, I'm so glad that I did have the guts to keep filming.
Yeah, well, the love comes through really in every frame. And finally, there is one last question, for this, actually, I'm really sorry. Jeannie Blaustein, who's a beloved friend of Rachel and the founding board chair of an organization devoted to reimagining the end of life called Reimagine, unfortunately, was at the last minute, wasn't able to join us tonight. But the question has to do with how can we continue Rachel's vision of living in the moment and talking about the end of life. I just want to tack on to that question, and I was really glad that you focused in on the beginning of Paul's piece in The Village Voice, about living in the land of the dying, where he realized, that the world is basically made up of those who are sick and those who are not yet sick, or those who realize they're dying and those who do not yet realize it. So as a takeaway and to end with this, how would you say this has changed your experience of your awareness of mortality and how to live in the moment to moment, and make the most of our lives while we're here?
Well, I will say that 2 weeks after Rachel passed away, I was diagnosed with lung cancer, and it was a ridiculously early diagnosis. It was like stage -1, and I really felt that it was like Rachel guiding the doctor to look at that it was an X-ray for something totally different. It was completely a fluke, but I felt like Rachel saved my life. But yeah, and just watching someone die makes you aware of mortality, but watching Rachel die makes you aware of living every moment.
Like that, I think, Khary? Well, I think that's one of many takeaways for all of us tonight. But I just want to end by thanking you, Paula, for this magnificent work. Khary, I want to thank you for your amazing work at Brotherhood Sister Sol. It's so moving and inspiring to know that Rachel's life and work and vision is going to be woven into the sacred work that you're doing there in Harlem. May it continue to thrive and grow and continue to change lives. As everyone up here, I know many people who are here for the live audience and a lot of people watching on the live stream, their lives were changed by Rachel Cowan. It's just a reminder that we all have the capacity, by the simple ways in which we live lives and we treat each other, and our capacity to love, that we have the capacity to change lives in ways that we can't even begin to imagine. So I want to say amen to everything you offered. Thanks to everybody for joining us tonight live. It is great to be with human beings in the same room. Say goodnight to the lady in the harbor down there. And thanks very much, Ari, for welcoming us tonight.
Yes, thank you, Ari. Thank you.
Thank you.
All thanks goes to you, Paula, Mark, and Khary. Thank you for being here, and to Jeannie, who worked with us in preparation for this evening's program. This evening was co-hosted by the Museum of Jewish Heritage and the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. We also want to thank our presenting partners, B'nai Jeshurun, Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan, and the Tricycle Foundation. It takes a village, and there are so many people who have been shaped by Rachel and are carrying on her legacy. So we really are grateful that you were with us this evening. A recording of this evening's panel discussion after the film will be sent to you tomorrow in an email, along with some additional resources, ways to support Brotherhood Sisterhood Sol, the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. We wish everyone a safe and healthy evening. Take care.